The Pantheon. The Pantheon, from the Greek, Temple of all the gods, on the site of an earlier temple commissioned by Marcus Agrippa during the reign of Augustus. It was rebuilt by the Emperor Hadrian in 126 Anno Domini. Its date of construction is uncertain, because Hadrian chose not to inscribe the new temple but rather to retain the inscription of Agrippa's older temple, which had burned down. The building is cylindrical with a portico of large granite Corinthian columns, 8 in the first rank and 2 groups of 4 behind, under a pediment. A rectangular vestibule links the porch to the rotunda, which is under a coffered concrete dome, with a central opening, oculus, to the sky. Almost 2,000 years after it was built, the Pantheon's dome is still the world's largest unreinforced concrete dome. The height to the oculus and the diameter of the interior circle are the same, 43 meters or 142 feet. This is supposed to give the temple magical powers, as a perfect sphere would fit in the measures. It is one of the best preserved of all ancient Roman buildings, in large part because it has been in continuous use throughout its history and, since the 7th century, the Pantheon has been in use as a church dedicated to Saint Mary and the Martyrs. The square in front of the Pantheon is called Piazza della Rotonda. The Pantheon's large circular dome cella, with the conventional temple portico front, was unique in Roman architecture. The Pantheon dome. The coffered dome has a central oculus as the main source of natural light. Apollodorus of Damascus, Trajan's architect, is credited to be the architect that designed and started to carry out its construction, in the way we see it today. In 609, the Byzantine Emperor Phocas gave the building to Pope Boniface IV, who converted it into a Christian church and consecrated it to St. Mary and the Martyrs. The building's consecration as a church saved it from the abandonment, destruction, and the worst of the spoliation that suffered the majority of ancient Rome's buildings during the early medieval period. Much fine external marble has been removed over the centuries. For example, capitals from some of the pilasters are in the British Museum. 2 columns were swallowed up in the medieval buildings that abutted the Pantheon on the east and were lost. In the early 17th century, Urban VIII Barberini tore away the bronze ceiling of the portico, and since then, the Roman population coined the famous say, "What the barbarians did not do to Rome, the Barberini did." All the bronze once melted was mainly used to build the main altar of the Church of St. Peter's. Burials. Among those buried there are the painters Raphael and Annibale Carracci, the composer Arcangelo Corelli, and the architect Baldassare Peruzzi. In the 15th century, the Pantheon was adorned with paintings. The best known is the Annunciation by Melozzo da Forlì. Also 2 kings of Italy are buried in the Pantheon, Vittorio Emanuele II and Umberto I, as well as Umberto's queen, Margherita. By the way, is after her that a famous pizza was named. It was supposed to be the final resting place for the monarchs of Italy of House of Savoy, but the monarchy was abolished in 1946 and the Republican authorities have refused to grant burial to the former kings who died in exile, namely Victor Emmanuel III and Umberto II. The Pantheon has therefore a dual use of Italian pagan monument, as well as a Catholic church, with masses are celebrated there on Sundays and holy days of obligation. Tourists are therefore asked to keep an appropriate level of deference. Weddings are also held there from time to time. The grey granite columns that were actually used in the Pantheon's pronaos were quarried in. Each was 11.9 meters, 39 feet, tall, 1.5 meters, 4 feet 11 in diameter, and 60 tons, 59 long tons, 66 short tons, in weight. These were dragged more than 100 kilometers, 62 miles, from the quarry to the river on wooden sledges. They were floated by barge down the Nile River when the water level was high during the spring floods, and then transferred to vessels to cross the Mediterranean Sea to the Roman port of Ostia. There, they were transferred back onto barges and pulled up the Tiber River to Rome. After being unloaded near the Mausoleum of Augustus, the site of the Pantheon was still about 700 meters away. Thus, it was necessary to either drag them or to move them on rollers to the construction site. In the walls at the back of the Pantheon's portico are two huge niches, perhaps intended for statues of Augustus Caesar and Agrippa. The large bronze doors to the cella, measuring 4.45 meters, 14.6 feet, wide by 7.53 meters, 24.7 feet, high, are the oldest in Rome. These were thought to be a 15th century replacement for the original, mainly because they were deemed by contemporary architects to be too small for the door frames. However, analysis of the fusion technique confirmed that these are the original Roman doors. The dome. The thickness of the dome varies from 6.4 meters, 21 feet, at the base of the dome to 1.2 meters, 3.9 feet, around the oculus. The materials used in the concrete of the dome also vary. At its thickest point, the aggregate is travertine, then terracotta tiles, then at the very top, tufa and pumice, both porous light stones. At the very top, where the dome would be at its weakest and vulnerable to collapse, the oculus lightens the load. The stresses in the dome were found to be substantially reduced by the use of successively less dense aggregate stones, such as small pots or pieces of pumice, in higher layers of the dome. The Pantheon still holds the record for the world's largest unreinforced concrete dome. Upon entry, visitors are greeted by an enormous rounded room covered by the dome. The oculus at the top of the dome was never covered, allowing rainfall through the ceiling and onto the floor. Because of this, the interior floor is equipped with drains and has been built with an incline of about 30 centimeters, 12 inches, to promote water runoff. The interior of the dome was intended to symbolize the arched vault of the heavens. The oculus at the dome's apex and the entry door are the only natural sources of light in the interior. Throughout the day, light from the oculus moves around this space in a reverse sundial effect, marking time with light rather than shadow. The oculus also offers cooling and ventilation. During storms, a drainage system below the floor handles rain falling through the oculus. It is part of the lesson, but only for notion-based information, as useful tool where to go back for reference. Here are the details of the church inside the Pantheon called St. Mary of the Martyrs. Please do not forget that Sundays up to 1200 noon, and any other religious day, as Christmas, Easter etc., the Pantheon will be accessible only for worshippers, and not tourists or visitors. Bear in mind that for many centuries this was the place where the people in the neighborhood would go and pray. The present high altars and the apses were commissioned by Pope Clement XI, 1700 to 1721, and designed by Alessandro Specchi. Enshrined on the apse above the high altar is a 7th century Byzantine icon of the Virgin and Child, given by Phocas to Pope Boniface IV on the occasion of the dedication of the Pantheon for Christian worship on 13th of May 609. The choir was added in 1840, and was designed by Luigi Poletti. The first niche to the right of the entrance holds a Madonna of the Girdle and St. Nicholas of Bari, 1686, painted by an unknown artist. The first chapel on the right, the Chapel of the Annunciation, has a fresco of the Annunciation attributed to Melizzo da Forlì. On the left side is a canvas by Clement Maioli of St. Lawrence and St. Agnes, 1645 to 1650. On the right wall is the Incredulity of St. Thomas, 1633, by Pietro Paolo Bonzi. The second niche has a 15th century fresco of the Tuscan school, depicting the coronation of the Virgin. In the second chapel is the tomb of King Victor Emmanuel II, died 1878. It was originally dedicated to the Holy Spirit. A competition was held to decide which architect should design it. Giuseppe Sacconi participated, but lost. He would later design the tomb of Umberto I in the opposite chapel. Manfredo Manfredi won the competition, and started work in 1885. The tomb consists of a large bronze plaque surmounted by a Roman eagle and the arms of the House of Savoy. The golden lamp above the tomb burns in honor of Victor Emmanuel III, who died in exile in 1947. The third niche has a sculpture by Il Lorenzone of St. Anne and the Blessed Virgin. In the third chapel is a 15th-century painting of the Umbrian school, the Madonna of Mercy between St. Francis and St. John the Baptist. It is also known as the Madonna of the Railing, because it originally hung in the niche on the left-hand side of the portico, where it was protected by a railing. It was moved to the Chapel of the Annunciation, and then to its present position sometime after 1837. The bronze epigram commemorated Pope Clement XI's restoration of the sanctuary. On the right wall is the canvas Emperor Phocas presenting the Pantheon to Pope Boniface IV, 1750, by an unknown. There are 3 memorial plaques in the floor, one commemorating a Gismonda written in the vernacular. The final niche on the right side has a statue of Saint Anastasius, Sant'Anastasio, 1725, by Bernardino Cometti. On the first niche to the left of the entrance is an Assumption, 1638, by Andrea Camase. The first chapel on the left, the Chapel of St. Joseph in the Holy Land, is the chapel of the Confraternity of the Virtuosi al Pantheon, a confraternity of artists and musicians formed by a 16th-century canon, Desiderio de Segni, to ensure that worship was maintained in the chapel. The first members were, among others, Antonio da Sangallo the Younger, Jacopo Meneghino, Giovanni Mangoni, Zaccari, Domenico Beccafumi, and Flaminio Vacca. The confraternity continued to draw members from the elite of Rome's artists and architects, and among later members we find Bernini, Cortona, Elgardi, and many others. The institution still exists, and is now called the Accademia Pontificia del Belle Arti, the Pontifical Academy of Fine Arts, based in the Palace of the Cancelleria. The altar in the chapel is covered with false marble. On the altar is a statue of Saint Joseph and the Holy Child by Vincenzo de Rossi. To the sides are paintings, 1661, by Francesco Cozza, one of the virtuosi, Adoration of the Shepherds on left side and Adoration of the Three Wise Men on right. The stucco relief on the left, Dream of Saint Joseph, is by Paolo Beneglia, and the one on the right, Rest during the Flight from Egypt, is by Carlo Monaldi. On the vault are several 17th-century canvases, from left to right, Cumene Sibyl by Ludovico Gimignani, Moses by Francesco Rosa, Eternal Father by Giovanni Peruzzini, David by Luigi Garzi, and Eritrean Sibyl by Giovanni Andrea Carloni. The second niche has a statue of Saint Agnes, by Vincenzo Felici. The bust on the left is a portrait of Baldassare Peruzzi, derived from a plaster portrait by Giovanni Dupri. The tomb of King Umberto I and his wife Margherita di Savoia is in the next chapel. The chapel was originally dedicated to Saint Michael the Archangel, and then to Saint Thomas the Apostle. The present design is by Giuseppe Sacconi, completed after his death by his pupil Guido Cerri. The tomb consists of a slab of alabaster mounted in gilded bronze. The frieze has allegorical representations of generosity, by Eugenio Maccagnani, and munificence, by Arnaldo Zacchi. The royal tombs are maintained by the National Institute of Honor Guards to the Royal Tombs, founded in 1878. They also organize picket guards at the tombs. The altar with the royal arms is by Cerri. The third niche holds the mortal remains, his ossa et cineres, bones and ashes, as the inscription on the sarcophagus says, of the great artist Raphael. His fiancée, Maria Bibbiena is buried to the right of his sarcophagus. She died before they could marry. The sarcophagus was given by Pope Gregory XVI, and its inscription reads Il hic est Raphael timuit quos ospit Vinci / rerum magna parens et morient mori, meaning here lies Raphael, by whom the great mother of all things, nature, feared to be overcome while he was living, and while he was dying, herself to die. The epigraph was written by Pietro Bembo. In the Chapel of the Crucifixion, the Roman brick wall is visible in the niches. The wooden crucifix on the altar is from the 15th century. On the left wall is a Descent of the Holy Ghost, 1790, by Pietro Labruzzi. On the right side is the low-relief Cardinal Consalvi presents to Pope Pius VII of 5 provinces restored to the Holy See, 1824, made by the Danish sculptor Bertel Thorvaldsen. The bust is a portrait of Cardinal Agostino Rivarola. The final niche on this side has a statue of Saint Evasius, Sant'Evasio,